Hello everyone, welcome to the Project Veritas Wall of Shame, where journalist reputations go to die. This one, RETRACTO 351, goes to Sam Stein of Politico for reporting, quote, Project Veritas tried to extort a Biden interview in the closing days of the campaign. Sam Stein has taken that off the internet for reasons we will get into. This is a sordid tale involving Joe Biden, Sam Stein, the New York Times, Mike Schmidt, and Rachel Maddow. Listen to this.
I mean, extorting a public figure like that in that way has legal implications.
Before we sort of get to the legalness of it, though.
Oh, yeah, you see what he did there? He refused to correct her, and many journalists are now having to print retractions. Cue the RETRACTO theme song. So we reached out to Sam Stein and said, are you kidding me? After he reported in a tweet, Project Veritas tried to extort a Biden interview. He took the entire thing down. Pretty ironic these journalists won't stand behind their statements. Now, why would Sam Stein say this? Well, he put a screenshot of a New York Times article by New York Times reporter Mike Schmidt, which read, Project Veritas was still trying to use the diary as leverage. Now, that's not actually true. It's Mike Schmidt engaging in disinformation. This is based on a New York Times article that came out, How Ashley Biden's Diary Made Its Way to Project Veritas. Now, before we get to the whole leverage thing, let's take a look at my comment to the New York Times. The New York Times reported, quote, asked a list of specific questions related to the investigation, Project Veritas responded with a statement from Mr. O'Keefe criticizing the New York Times, unquote. That's what they said. They said that I was, quote, criticizing the New York Times. Now let's take a look at the statement that I actually gave to the New York Times. 2 days before the article came out, I wrote the following quote, our attorney saying, please include Mr. O'Keefe's response in its entirety and do not selectively edit it. Here was the full statement. It wasn't my criticism. I was quoting the judge in New York ruling that our defamation lawsuit can proceed. And here's my quote of the judge. Quote, the New York Times accuses Project Veritas of deception and more, but the New York Supreme Court ruled otherwise, stating that the dictionary definitions of disinformation and deception certainly apply to the New York Times' failure to note that they injected their opinions in news articles about Project Veritas, unquote. But do you see what the New York Times reported? They reported that I, quote, was criticizing the New York Times. So if you only read the New York Times and don't watch our videos and see what I'm saying right now, you would never know what the judge said about the New York Times. You would have a wrong impression that I was attacking the New York Times rather than quoting a New York Supreme Court justice saying that they're engaged in disinformation by injecting their opinion in news articles. That's not my statement or my criticism. That's a statement from a judge, which is an extraordinary statement, something that rarely happens. But you wouldn't know that if you're a reader of the Times. Now, here's why I quoted the Supreme Court Justice Charles Wood calling the New York Times disinformation, because the sentence in the New York Times article that everyone's leveraging, so to speak, is, quote, but Project Veritas was still trying to use the diary as leverage, closed quote. You see, that's not true. We did not have that intent. That was not our motivation. That was Mike Schmidt engaging in disinformation. What was Mike Schmidt utilizing in order to conclude that we used it as leverage? He was using a letter written by Jared Eade, our chief legal counsel to Ashley Biden's lawyer. I have a copy of the full letter, and I'm going to read that paragraph back to you. Here's what Mike Schmidt wrote, quote, should we not hear from you by Tuesday, October 20th, 2020, we will have no choice but to act unilaterally and reserve the right to disclose that you refused our offer to provide answers to the questions raised by your daughter. Now, here's what Mike Schmidt selectively edited out. In the sentence immediately before, should we not hear from you, the legal letter writes, quote, we make this offer in good faith with the hopes to allow you, Mr. Biden, to present your side of the story to the public. They took out that sentence from the letter that our lawyer sent to Biden. They doctored out that sentence so that you couldn't see that, so that the reader would draw a false impression of something nefarious, when what we were doing, which is what a responsible journalist should do, is to reach out to someone for comment. This is what journalists are supposed to do, to try to corroborate information. There may have only been a 0.0001% chance that a person responds, but it was our ethical obligation to reach out. But they're trying to turn something positive into a negative. It's not just us that thinks this is ridiculous. After Sam Stein reported that this was extortion, you had a lot of people on Twitter responding to this exchange. Eyes on the right, quote, just normal journalism shit. Tom Elliott, apparently reporters announcing their deadline equals extortion. Chuck Ross, just because Biden's team called it extortion doesn't make it extortion. Pete, that's not extortion, like at all. Andrew Follett, blue checkmark. How dare a journalist ask for comment on a story before deadline? Christy Brown, saying to give comment by a specific date isn't extortion. In fact, writing this article for the New York Times, Mike Schmidt reached out to us and, according to Mike Schmidt, engaged in extortion. Listen to this. Paul, that's my lawyer, we're doing a story about Ashley Biden's diary and the ongoing federal investigation. Here are some specific questions we have for Project Veritas. If you want to comment or answer any of these questions, we'd appreciate responses by the end of the day. So Mike Schmidt is engaging in precisely the same activity he's accusing us of, but calling what we do extortion, but he's a journalist. Got it. That doesn't make any sense. In fact, on MSNBC's Rachel Maddow, you can even see it in Mike Schmidt's eyes when Rachel Maddow states that we are engaging in extortion, and he wants to change the subject.
I mean, extorting a public figure like that in that way has legal implications.
Before we sort of get to the legalness of it, though, I think we have to talk about the personal.
Did you notice what he just did? He didn't want to actually push back. He knew that that's not true because that's called asking for comment. But rather than push back against Maddow, he let that false statement go. He didn't push back on it. Now, Mike Schmidt is responsible for all of these things that people are saying because of that one characterization he made about using something as leverage. Because he used those words, Rachel Maddow went in front of 1 million people, maybe more, and said what she said. But the lack of courage for Mike Schmidt to let that lie stand. And that's the anatomy of a lie traveling halfway around the world before the truth can even put on its shoes. There are going to be a lot more retractions as a result of what Mike Schmidt did. I mean, this is something called The Independent, a shadowy conservative media organization known for its dirty tricks and deceptive hidden camera videos, purportedly tried blackmailing the president. Do you see what's happening here? A request for comment, selectively edited, turns into leverage, turns into tried blackmailing the president of the United States. Now, they're going to have to retract that, and we're reaching out to them to do so. But this, ladies and gentlemen, is how the Penrose Stairs works. This is how the game is played. Now, the difference between us and the New York Times is the New York Times does not want to actually engage in a conversation with Project Veritas. We've tried repeatedly to get them on the telephone. They actually refuse. They don't want to talk to us, which actually is anathema to their own code of conduct. I'm going to read the New York Times ethical code to you, guidelines on integrity. That's ironic. It says, quote, the Times and its staff maintain the highest possible standards to ensure that we do nothing that might erode readers' faith and confidence in our news columns. Also from the New York Times Code of Conduct, quote, few writers need to be reminded that we seek and publish a response from anyone criticized in our pages. But when the criticism is serious, we have a special obligation to describe the scope of the accusation and let the subject respond in detail. Their own code of ethics, I'm quoting their ethical code, mandates that they let the person being accused, and by the way, based upon what Mike Schmidt has reported, everyone's saying that I extorted the president, which is a really amazing claim. And they won't even publish what I've written them. Quote, no subject should be taken by surprise when the paper appears or feel that there was no chance to respond. They're not even letting us respond. They didn't even publish my comment. The decision for us to publish the diary was not reliant upon how Biden responded, and that very point was the thing that was doctored out of what they included in the article, perhaps intentionally. Oh, and perhaps we should sue them, you're probably thinking. Well, we did last year, and we're winning. But do you see the problem in our country? This is why we're in the state that we're in. So what do we do about it? We have to bring attention. We have to show you the actual letter ourselves. We have to bring you the raw information because we trust you. We trust the audience to take and draw conclusions of what they see fit. We're not going to tell you what to believe, and we're not going to falsely characterize it. We're going to quote it. And I'm going to read it again. Quote, we make this offer in good faith with the hopes to allow you, Mr. Biden, to present your side of the story to the public. Should we not hear from you by Tuesday, October 20th, we will have no choice but to act unilaterally and reserve the right to disclose that you refused our offer to provide answers to the questions raised by your daughter. We hope you accept the offer and let the public know your side of the story. What should we have done? Not done that? Oh, and by the way, I didn't publish it. We didn't publish it. So the real question is, what more could a responsible, ethical journalist do than what it is that we did? The answer is, of course, nothing. And the fact that the paper of record, the old gray lady, all the news that's fit to print, can take something ethical and good and pure and turn it into something evil should outrage all of you. And that is why all these journalists now have to retract because of what you did. And here's what I've learned. I've learned that the world is round. I've learned that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, and sometimes it takes a little while, but it always does bend, and the truth always comes out. And the truth is, this is ridiculous, and you know it. And Mike Schmidt knows it because you can see it in his eyes when he went on MSNBC and changed the subject in that moment in time. And all of this could have been avoided. All of it. If you just put Jared's letter up in its entirety. No one would have drawn this false conclusion. Sam Stein wouldn't have drawn the false conclusion. Rachel Maddow probably wouldn't have drawn the false conclusion, although in Rachel Maddow's case, a judge said that viewers expect her to give opinion and not news. Nevertheless, even she would not have said that on television in front of millions of people had you just not doctored out the first sentence of that legal letter or that legal letter's paragraph. All of this could have been avoided if you just stuck to the facts, if you just did the thing that you're supposedly renowned for doing. But you didn't do that. You, quote, injected your opinion in news articles, close quote, to quote the judge about your organization.
The articles that are the subject of this action called the video, quote, deceptive, but the dictionary definitions of, quote, disinformation and deceptive provided by defendant's counsel certainly apply to Astor's and Shu's failure to note that they injected their opinions in news articles, as they now claim.
Judges only said that to one organization. They said that about the New York Times, not Project Veritas, because we don't do that. We let the people decide, because we have a faith in the people to make the right decisions as long as they're given access to unfiltered information. And that's why we're going to be sending you a retracto, Sam Stein. And while we're sending an alpaca to Sam Stein, Sam, you should feel free to send that alpaca to Mike Schmidt, because I actually believe, Sam, you're sort of a victim of what Michael Schmidt, in this case, has done. And all of it could have been avoided if you just did your jobs and stuck to the facts.
We need the news, not protection.